Better-Auth is the new king on the block when it comes to authentication, and everyone on X is raving about it. Because it's free, you own all your user data, and it has a really powerful plugin system that allows you to add additional features with minimal effort. Now today is your lucky day, because in this hands-on tutorial you will learn how to use Better-Auth to handle authentication, store user data in your own Postgres database, send transactional emails like verification and password reset emails, add social login like Google and GitHub, protect your pages and server endpoints without making unnecessary duplicate requests, give access to special roles like admins, and allow users to update their profile and login data. And at the end we will even deploy everything to Vercel and make sure that every feature still works. Besides Better-Auth, we will use Next.js 15, Prisma Postgres as our database, and Resend to send transactional emails, and all these tools are free to use. I will even provide the starting code that you can clone and follow along step by step. Welcome to Coding in Flow. I'm Florian Walter and I make web dev tutorials that cut the fluff and get straight to the point. If you want to learn at high speed, subscribe to the channel. In the video description below will be the link to the starting code for this project. You can copy this link and clone this repository on your computer. Just open the command line, git clone the repository from this link, open the project, and in here I already have prepared some code. So first we have to open the command line and run npm install to install all the packages listed in the package.json. Because I've already installed Prisma, Better-Auth, and also a bunch of other packages that we will need. But don't worry, you don't have to use the starting code. I will also explain everything step by step, including the installation. So if you want to use your own code instead, you can do that as well. If you want to use the starting code, clone the repository, install the packages, and then we can run this project with npm run dev. Then you can open this website on localhost 3000, and I've already prepared a bunch of different pages. But I haven't added a database yet, so this is fake user data and also no authentication whatsoever. So currently I can access every page without being logged in. So we have a dashboard page, we have this admin page, we have a profile page, and we will implement Better-Auth in all these pages later. And of course we also have a sign-in page and a sign-up page that look like this. And we will add functionality to all these different pages. In case you're wondering why the UI looks so damn good, is because I'm using ShadCN UI components. This is what I use in pretty much all of my Next.js projects. ShadCN provides these beautiful components. I've already added them to the starting code so that we save some time, and they are all located here in this components folder. For the styling, I've copied a theme from TweakCN, which is a really cool website to customize your ShadCN theme. If we click on the examples here, we have all these beautiful different themes, and I just used, I think it's this one, this nature theme. So if you want to customize your theme, go to TweakCN, but of course for this tutorial you don't have to do this. I've already installed a theme. Okay, and in the GitHub repository will also later be a final code branch where you can find the final code at the end of this tutorial. If you don't use the starting code and you need to copy paste any code from my project, you can go to the repository, check out the final code branch, and you will find all the code there. Okay, for our database we will use Prisma as the ORM and Prisma Postgres, which is the actual database. You can use this for free, which is really cool, and also Prisma is sponsoring this video, so I thank them for their support, and I use Prisma in pretty much all of my personal projects. It's just a really nice ORM and I like it, and I've never seen a reason to switch to a different one. It does everything very nicely. They also have this Better-Auth setup guide, which explains how to set up Prisma with Better-Auth. And I will walk you through everything step by step. So first of all, we have to install these packages. I already did this in the starting code. If you're not using my starting code, you have to execute these two commands, npm install Prisma and Prisma extension and the Prisma client. But in the starting code, they are already located here in the package.json. Then we have to initialize our Prisma client and create a database, and we can do both of this with a single command, which is really cool. So we copy this command, or you can type it out by hand. Go back into our project. Let's stop the app for now and execute this command. npx prisma init --db --output and then this path here. Make sure to enter this correctly and then we run this. In order to get our free database, we have to log into our Prisma account. So we confirm, would you like to authenticate with a Y? And then we pick either Google or GitHub for sign in. I'm gonna pick Google. Then we have to open this link. It also opens automatically in your web browser. And I'm gonna log in with this Google account. This is the first time I'm using this account, so this creates a new Prisma account. We can close this tab, go back to VS Code. Then this will set up a brand new free database for us. We select the location and it makes sense to select something close to yourself. So this is as fast as possible. I'm in Germany, so I'm gonna pick Frankfurt, enter a project name, Better-Auth tutorial, for example. And this creates a new database and a project on Prisma. And this is really the easiest and most streamlined database creation process I've ever seen. You do everything via the command line and this sets up Prisma, the Prisma database, it sets up the connection string and everything. This is really convenient. So this created a bunch of files. For example, we should now have this schema.prisma file. Here we will put our database schema. It also created the .env file with the database URL. This is already the correct URL to our database, so we don't have to change this. And over this link we can open the console in the web browser. Let's take a look at this as well. We have to log in here. And here is our database, and in here you can take a look at your data later if you want, but we actually don't need this page because everything is already set up, so we can close this. We go in the command line again and we have to generate the Prisma client, which we do with npx prisma generate. Type this out correctly, press enter, and this creates this generated folder here with some Prisma code in there that we later need. This is also mentioned in this setup guide here, Prisma generate, and then we have to set up a global Prisma client, which we do in this folder, in the lib folder. Here we create a Prisma TS file, and in here we put this code. So I'm gonna copy paste this. We already have this lib folder, we right click on it, create a new file called Prisma TS. And in here I'm gonna copy paste this code. So you can either go to this page here, the Better-Auth Prisma setup guide, but I will also put a link to this file into the video description below, so you can copy it from there or just type it out by hand if you're not lazy. So we set up this file and save it, and that's it. Now we have a fully functional database. Isn't this cool? And next we will set up Better-Auth. This is also described in the setup guide. So after we set up the Prisma client, we have to install Better-Auth with this command, which I already did in the starting code. And then we need a Better-Auth secret, which we can get with this command. So let's open the command line again. Run this npx Better-Auth CLI at latest secret. We confirm this with Y. And this just creates a secret key string, a random string basically, and prints it to the console. So we copy this whole line, Better-Auth secret, and we put it into our .env file below the database URL. Better-Auth needs this internally for authentication. Then we add another environment variable with this exact name, better_auth_URL, and we set this to http://localhost 3000, which is our base URL, right? So add this as well, make sure to spell the variable name correctly. Then let's take a look into the setup guide again. So we have the secret, we have the URL. Now we have to create this auth.ts file in the lib folder, which contains our Better-Auth configuration. So back into our project, we create another file in the lib folder called auth.ts. And we will later do a lot of setup in here. But for now we keep it simple. We export a const called auth and we assign it to Better-Auth. We have to import this from the Better-Auth package, and in here we should find this Better-Auth function, which we call here parentheses curly braces, and in here we do the configuration. We start by connecting a database. Better-Auth supports many different database types and ORMs. We will use Postgres and Prisma. So here for the database value, we pass Prisma, but again we have to import this manually from Better-Auth /adapters/Prisma. And in here we should find this Prisma adapter function, which we call here. To this we pass our Prisma client that we set up in the lib folder, comma, curly braces, and we set the provider to PostgreSQL, because this is what we use for our database. And I never know for sure how to pronounce this. Is it PostgreSQL? Is it PostgreSQL? Who the F came up with this name? Anyway, below the database, we also add email and password. And this is how you configure different authentication methods in Better-Auth. We start with simple email and password login, and later we will also add social login. And Better-Auth has many more options like username and password, magic links and whatever, but more about that later. For now, just email and password, and we enable this like this. Okay, let's take a look into the setup guide again. So we've already set up this. We enabled email and password login. This is not necessary because we didn't change the default base URL. And then we have to add these models, which actually contains our user data. And we can do all of this with this command here, which is really cool, because then we don't have to enter them manually. So in the command line, we run npx Better-Auth CLI generate. Let's give this a try. We confirm this with y. This will ask us if we want to overwrite the schema file, because we already have a schema.prisma file, right? But we didn't add any models here yet. So we confirm this with a y. And this automatically added all these models that we need for authentication later to the schema.prisma file. But we can modify this, and we want to add one more field to the user model. Somewhere in here, I'm going to put this here below the image, but it doesn't matter where exactly you put this. We also want to add an optional role to the user model. Later, this role can be, for example, admin, to give the user special admin access. So we add this here. Then we open the command line again and run npx Prisma DB push, which pushes these changes, these new models, to our database. So they are actually created in our Prisma Postgres database. So we run this command. So now all these models should be in our database. Let's take a look into the setup guide again. We have the model, we have pushed these changes. Now we have to set up these API routes for Better-Auth, which handles the authentication itself. And in there we have to put this code, and this is the location where we have to put it. We have to create this catch-all route handler in the API folder. So let's do this. Back in our project, we right-click on app. We create a new file. We type API/, this creates a new folder, auth/, which creates another folder, then square brackets. And in these square brackets, we write ... all, which creates a catch-all route, which means that this creates multiple paths at once that Better-Auth later uses to handle authentication. You don't have to understand this in detail, but this is basically a Next.js feature, these catch-all routes. And then /route.ts, which creates the actual file. So now you should have a route.ts file under this exact location. src app API auth, then this all route, and in here should be a route.ts file now. And here we export a const that we destructure, and we have to call another function that we have to import above from Better-Auth /next.js. So Better-Auth works with Next.js out of the box, and here we have this toNext.js handler function, which we call parentheses, and to this we have to pass this auth object that we created in our lib folder. This one here with all the configuration. We have to pass this here, and then we have to destructure the post and get endpoints, and this activates authentication, so to speak. We don't actually do anything with these routes later. Better-Auth handles this automatically. Then the last step is to create a Better-Auth client, which is then what we interact with in all our code. And we do it like this. We create this new file in the lib folder and create an auth client. So let's do that as well. So we scroll down to the lib folder, right click, new file, and we call it auth-client.ts. We export a const called auth-client, and we have to call another function that we have to import from Better-Auth/React. And in here is this create auth-client function, this one, that we call here, parentheses, curly braces. And in here we can add different plugins. Plugins are how you add additional functionality to Better-Auth. There are many different plugins available. We will take a closer look at them later. There is one specific plugin that we need for now, which is called Next Cookies. It's this one here, from the Better-Auth Next.js folder. We call this in here, and this plugin is only necessary if you call Better-Auth authentication functions like sign in or sign up from Next.js server actions. We actually won't use server actions here, so we technically don't need this plugin, but since this is a Next.js project, it makes sense to install this in case you want to use these other functions later. So we add this plugin, and that's it for the Better-Auth setup for now. Okay, now let's set up the actual sign up and sign in pages. For this we run our app again with npm run dev in the command line. Then we open localhost 3000 again and we go to the sign in page. And from here we can reach the sign up page. Again, they don't work yet. I've only prepared the UI so far. Here we have this nice form with real-time validation. The code for this is under sign up/page.tsx. This is the sign up page. Here we set the metadata, and in here we have this sign up form, which is a Next.js client component. Client component means that we can use JavaScript functionality like on-click listeners and all of this stuff here. This is related to Next.js. I explained this in my Next.js beginner tutorial. Watch this if you haven't worked with Next.js yet. But here we have the actual sign up form. So here is the UI with all these different form fields. Then a validation schema that provides the real-time validation that you saw a moment ago. And for this, again, I'm using ShadCN form components, which provides all of this functionality out of the box. Again, I don't want to go through this in detail here because this is not important for this tutorial, but I use ShadCN and these form components in many other tutorials as well. So this page provides the form. But most importantly, the onSubmit function is still empty. This is where we want to handle the sign up process. But when I click the sign up button right now, it doesn't do anything even if I enter actual user data. It doesn't actually create an account yet. We will implement this together. Okay, let's implement this. Back into our project. We go into this onSubmit function. First of all, we set the error to null. This will contain any potential error messages. We put them in this use state to show them in the UI. But when we click the onSubmit button, we want to reset this error back to null. Then comes the interesting part. We destructure a const and we call await auth-client. This is coming from our lib folder. This auth-client we set up earlier, remember? And on here we can call different functions. For example, sign up. And then .email for email sign up. Parentheses, curly braces. To this we have to pass a bunch of different values and they are coming from our form fields. So we have these different form inputs here with the name, email address and password, and we have to pass them to this sign up function. So email, comma, password, comma, and the name. And how you handle forms is up to you. Again, I use ShadCN form components here, but you can also use normal HTML forms. The only thing that matters is that somehow you get an email, a password and a name that you can then pass to this email sign up function. And one more value, which is this callback URL. This is only important later when we implement email verification. And here we can set a URL that the user will be redirected to after they verified their email. And we will redirect them to /email verified. This is another very simple page that I have set up in the starting code, which looks like this. /email verified, and this is what the user will see after they clicked the email verification link. Your email has been verified and then they can go to the dashboard. Okay, and from this function we get back data and error. We need the error. which either has a value if an error happened, or it is null if everything went well and there was no error. So below we check if error is defined. Then we want to set our error state to either error.message if it is defined. If it is undefined, we will show a generic error message instead that just says something went wrong. So this will be shown in the UI if an error happens, and somewhere down here we render this error message in a simple div. And it's contained in the state, pretty basic. If we didn't get an error, this means the sign up was successful. Then we want to show a toast message, for which we import this toast function from Sonar. Again, this is coming from shadcn, and I installed this already in the starting code. And we want to show a toast success message, which will say, signed up successfully. This will be a little message in the bottom right corner, just for user feedback. And then we call router.push to navigate the user to the dashboard automatically. So they sign up, they see the success message, and they get redirected to the dashboard immediately. And they are already logged in. And this is all you need to implement sign up with Better-Auth. So let's give this a try. Make sure to save your code. Again, we have this real cool real-time validation. But I'm going to enter some data here. So name Florian Walter. I enter a real email address and a password. ASD123. And to the password validation, I added a rule that we have to add at least one special character. And down here we have to repeat our password. Then we want to create an account. Invalid origin. Let's look into our project. In the end file where we set up the Better-Auth URL, here I made a typo. I entered 30,000 instead of 3,000. This should be the correct URL. 3,000. So let's try this again. Create an account. And we see the toast message, and we get redirected to the dashboard. Now it doesn't look different than before yet. We are not actually showing the real user data here yet, but we actually created a real user account. And I can prove it by looking into our database. We can open the command line again. Let's open a new terminal, a second one, where we run npx Prisma Studio. This is a cool tool that allows us to look into our database. And here we have now a new user with my name. The email isn't verified yet. We will take care of this later. He doesn't have a role or an image, but he is connected to a session, which means that he is logged in, and an account. The account is this credential account, meaning email and password. Okay, sign up works. Let's also implement sign in. For this, we open the sign in form .tsx, where we have to do something similar. I already added the states and the UI, and here we want to handle the onSubmit function for now. Again, we get this user input here, and we can pass it to the Better-Auth function. Again, we destructure a const which can contain an error, and call await-auth client .signin .email again, parentheses curly braces. To it we pass the input email, password, and remember me. Remember me decides if the user is staying logged in after they close the website. Let's take a look at /signin again. And later we will automatically redirect already logged in users. So if I'm already logged in, I won't be able to reach this page. But for now we can open it while already being logged in. And here we have this remember me checkbox. And this is just a boolean that we then pass to the sign-in function. At the start of the function, not to forget, we set the error message back to null. And we also have a separate loading state here. We didn't need this in the sign up form because here I used the loading state of the form library. But here, since we have social login and other kinds of login, we have a separate loading state. So here we set loading to true. After sign in was successful, we set loading back to false. And below we check if we got an error. Again, we want to set the error state to render the error message in the UI with a fallback message. something went wrong. And if there was no error, so sign in was successful, again we want to show a toast message that says signed in successfully. And then again I want to navigate the user to the dashboard page. So after sign in, they automatically get redirected to /dashboard. And this is all we need for sign in to work. We will handle social authentication later, but for now we save this, and before we try this out, let's also add the sign out functionality, because we are still logged in, and before we can sign in again, we have to log out first, right? And we handle this in this user drop-down menu that you already saw in the navbar here in the top right corner. Later we will show the actual user data here, but here we have this sign out button which doesn't do anything yet. We have to implement this here. So we scroll down to the sign out item, and here we have this handle sign out function, which again looks very similar. We destructure an error. We call await auth client.signout, parentheses, no curly braces this time, because we don't have to configure this. But again, we check if there was an error, in which case this time we will show an error toast message with error.message, or again something went wrong as a fallback message. And if sign out was successful, we show a success toast, signed out successfully, and then we navigate the user to the sign in page, because now they are logged out and they should be navigated back to the authentication page, right? Let's save this and try this out. So back on our page, we can now click the sign out button, which logs us out and navigates us back to the sign in page. And now we should be able to sign in. Florian at Coding and Flow. Let's first try adding the wrong password. Login. We see this error message in the UI, invalid email or password. This is coming from Better-Auth. We just render it in the UI via error.message here, right? This is this error message that we get back. We render this in the UI because we entered the wrong password. And when we enter the correct password, we log in successfully and we get redirected back to the dashboard page. Perfect. Now these functions we use here are called directly from client components. So from the browser, we have a client component and we call these sign in and sign up and sign out functions directly from the auth client. We could also do the server side. We could create a server action and call these functions server side there, but this is a bit unnecessary because why should we route this over our own server instead of just calling it from the client? A few cool things I want to mention. First of all, whenever the user logs in, the session is automatically renewed. So by default, it expires after 7 days. So if the user doesn't log in for 7 days, they get logged out automatically. You can configure this in this auth object if you want, but you don't have to. When the user logs in, the session is automatically refreshed and they get another 7 days, which is really cool. This makes sure that a user that actively uses your app every day is not automatically logged out, which would be really annoying. And Better-Auth also automatically rate limits your auth endpoint, which is very unusual for an authentication library. They usually don't handle this automatically, but it's very important because you don't want to allow users to brute force password logins by just entering 1,000 different passwords per second. So this is rate limited by default. Again, you can configure this, but this already works out of the box without changing anything. This checks the IP address of the user by default, and it's just really cool that this works. This also prevents that people create too many accounts in too short of a time frame. So this is just interesting to know. And now we actually want to load the user's session data and show that in the UI, because this is not the real data here. This is fake data. How you fetch the user data depends if we are in a client or in a server component. Our dashboard is a server component, and on the server we get the session like this. We call this Better-Auth function, pass the headers. Now this is quite verbose, and instead of repeating this over and over again, I want to wrap this into my own function, which I can then use. So what we do is, back in our project, we create a new file in the lib folder. called get-session.ts. Of course, the name of this file is up to you. You can name this whatever you want. Here we export an async function called get-server-session. And in here we execute the code that we saw in the docs. We turn await auth, which is coming from our auth file that we set up earlier. On here we can call .api, .getSession. And here we have to pass the headers. This is what you saw in the docs a moment ago. And in Next.js we can import the headers from this next headers package here. And we have to call this because this is a function. And we have to await this because it's async, very important. So enter the exact code I entered here. And now in all our server components and server actions, we can just call this getServer function. And we don't have to repeat this code here over and over again. This function will also have another benefit later, but for now, this is all you need to know. Just make sure to watch this video all the way to the end, because there are some things I will explain later that you need to understand. Next we go to the dashboard page, which is this page.tsx file in the dashboard folder here. Here we want to check for authentication and show the actual user data, because right now we are showing this fake data, right? So let's start by checking for authentication here. We remove this to-do comment, and we want to protect this page if the user is not logged in. For this we retrieve the session via this function that we just created. getServer-session. We call and await this. For this we have to make this component an async function, which is possible because this is a React server component. This is executed on the server. And in the session is the user, session.user. This either has a value with the user data from our database or undefined if the user is not logged in. And if the user is not logged in, they should not be able to even open this dashboard page, right? So what we do is we check if !user, so if user is undefined, and then we can do a bunch of different things. We could, for example, redirect the user to the sign-in page, but I don't want to do this. I want to call this an authorized function, which is a new function that they added to Next.js. And this is really cool, because when we call this, the user gets redirected to this unauthorized page that I already set up, where they see this message. Please sign in to continue. Then we have this link to the sign-in page. But again, you could also just redirect to the sign-in page directly. This is up to you. I just wanted to show you this unauthorized page. And later for the admin page, we also have another one called forbidden.tsx. This will be shown if the user is logged in, but they don't have the correct rights to access this page. But more on that later. One more thing, right now you have to enable these unauthorized and forbidden pages in the next config file. I already did this in the starting code. Here in this experimental block, you have to set auth interrupts to true. This activates these two pages, unauthorized and forbidden. Alright, and next we also want to set up the navbar. Again, here we want to fetch the session data and show it in the UI. So above, again, we fetch the session the same way. getServer-session. Again, this is a server component, so we can make this an async function. Then we want to get the user out of the session object. And if the user is undefined, we want to return null. We don't want to render this navbar whatsoever if the user is not logged in. So it will just not show up, because this navbar should only show for logged in users, right? We will show the user data later. Let's save this for now. And as you can see, the navbar is located in this main folder, which has parentheses around its name. So let's take a look at the folder structure again. We have src, we have our app. Here we have two so-called route groups, main and auth. Route groups are a Next.js feature with which you can separate your app into different sections. And each of these route groups can have its own layout. And I do this because the main route group has the navbar inside it at the top. And if you hear the weird scream, this was my stomach actually. It has been empty for a few hours. Anyway, the navbar is only shown in whatever pages we put into this main route group. The authentication pages are in this separate auth route group, which doesn't show the navbar. If you want to learn more about route groups, check the Next.js documentation or watch my Next.js beginner tutorial. For now, let's save everything and let's try this out again. So when we now log out, we should not be able to access the dashboard page anymore. So we get redirected, but even if I try to go to the dashboard directly, I now see this unauthorized page. And I don't see the navbar anymore. Pretty cool, right? But if I log in, I will be able to access the dashboard again. Let's try this out. Log in. And we are on the dashboard. And now we want to show our user data here. Now one more thing I want to mention. We fetch the session at the moment on our dashboard and in the navbar, right? Via getServerSession. And since both of these components are shown on the same page, dashboard and navbar, means that we call this function twice at the moment. We can actually see this if we log this here with console.log. Let's render getServerSession. Let's look into the console. And we can see that whenever we open this page, we call this function twice, which is a bit wasteful because we make 2 requests to our database. We will fix this problem later, so make sure to watch this tutorial all the way to the end because this is important. For now we will keep it like this, but we will fix this. Let's go back to the dashboard page because here now I want to show the actual user data. Since we fetched the user already up here, we can pass it as a prop to the profile information. We could also retrieve the session right here inside this component, but since we already check if the user is undefined, it's better if we pass it as a prop because then we know that it is defined because we already have this check. So let's create an interface, profile information props, and to this component we will pass a user, which we import from the Better-Auth package, this one here. We pass this user down here from the profile information props, and then we can delete this fake user object because now we have real user data. There's just one problem. It doesn't detect the role. It detects the name, which is a string, the image, because this data is included with our Better-Auth model by default, name, email, image, and so on, but not the role. Because remember, we added the role to the schema ourselves earlier. This was not part of the original Better-Auth schema. We added this. And Better-Auth doesn't detect this new field that we added by default. It doesn't fetch it automatically. So this is a TypeScript problem. But of course there's a way around this. We open the auth.ts file again. And here below email and password, we have this user key, curly braces. Here we can configure additional fields, colon curly braces. And here we can add whatever fields we want to add. We want to add this role. Here we set a type. This will be a string. And then important, we set input to false. If we set this to true, then the user can set their role themselves. But of course, a user shouldn't be able to change their role to admin or whatever they want. Only we should be able to do this. So we set this to false. So user cannot set their own role. Very important. Now this is enough to return this new role field from our user data, but it's not enough for TypeScript yet to detect this new value in the user object. To configure TypeScript, we have to export our own types. So we export a type called session. And this is described in the Better-Auth documentation. We can set up these types with the typeof keyword. Then we take our auth object. Then we have this infer value that we can call on it, and then session. And what this does is it creates the session type and it infers it from our auth configuration. Then we do this one more time below, and this one we call user, type of auth.infer.session.user. And this user one is very important, because this user now contains the role, because we added the role as an additional field. So now we have this user type with this role that we can use, for example, on the dashboard page. So we imported this user type earlier from Better-Auth, but this is the wrong type. Instead, we want to import the user type from our own auth file, right? So we delete this import statement and we import it again, this time from libauth, because this user now contains the role, which we can now use to render the correct data in the UI. Then we open our auth client TS file, and here we have to add another plugin, which is called Infer additional fields, but again we have to import this manually. Import curly braces from Better-Auth /client/plugins, and here is a function called Infer additional fields. We put this before next cookies. This is important. This is mentioned in the Better-Auth documentation. Next cookies always has to be the last entry in this array. I don't know why, but it has to be the last entry. So before next cookies, we call infer additional fields. We add a pair of angle brackets, and in here we write type of, and again we use this auth object from our auth.ts file. Then we call this and add a comma, like this. So now this puts these additional fields into this auth client, and the additional fields are these ones here. This way we can also access the role field in client components. This is why we have to add this here as well. So save this. We have to finish setting up our dashboard page because we don't yet pass this prop to the profile information. Here we pass the user that we get from the session object, right? Let's remove this comment, and we only want to show the email verification alert, which is this part here at the top, if the email is actually not verified. So we surround this with curly braces, and here we check if exclamation mark user.email verified. If this is false, only then we want to render this email verification alert, right? So now we should already see the correct user data in our dashboard, and there we go. Florian Walter, the correct email address and sign up date. Later we will also be able to upload a profile image, but for now it shows this placeholder instead. Next, let's take care of the navbar, where we also want to show the correct user data. So back in our project, let's close all these tabs first. We open the user dropdown. Here again we render fake data at the moment. So let's pass the user data as a prop to this component. User dropdown props. Again we will pass a user. Again important, use the one from our auth file, because this one contains our role string. So we pass this prop to the user dropdown. Then we can remove this fake user data, because now we have real user data. And here I left this comment that says hide this admin item for non-admin users. So we wrap this admin item into a curly braces again, and we check only if user.role is equal to admin, then we want to show this item in the first place. Now, of course, later the admin page will also be protected. So even if we navigate to the admin page via the URL, we will not be able to open it if we are not an admin. But we also want to hide this menu item if we are not an admin. And important, we also have to pass this user from our navbar to the user dropdown, right? Which now expects the user, which we get from the session. And since we check if the user is defined up here, we already know that it is not null when we get down here. And let's remove this to-do comment. Let's take a look. Now we also see the correct name here in the drop-down menu, and the admin button has disappeared because this user is not an admin. Now what we can actually do is we can go into Prisma Studio and we can change the role of this user right here. Let's set this to admin. Save these changes. Now when I refresh the page, we see the admin item again, because now I have the admin role, which is also shown down here on this badge. My email also isn't verified yet. This is why I see this message. We will send actual verification emails later. One more thing I want to mention. Right now we do all the session fetching in server components, right? Via this get server session function. Since Next.js is a server-side framework, I prefer to fetch as much data as possible in server components because this is more convenient and this is how Next.js is supposed to be used. But sometimes you need your session data in client components, and there you can access it via this use session hook, which is described in the Better-Auth documentation. So if you are in a client component, you can use this use session hook, which returns the same session data together with an error and a loading state, but we fetched the session server side like this. You can learn more in the Better-Auth documentation. Now before we continue, I want to add an important fix to our getServerSession function, because as I mentioned earlier, we call this function twice at the moment every time we open our page, because we call it once in the navbar and then in the page itself. So we call this function twice, which means that we make one unnecessary database request when we open the page, which is very wasteful. Now in client components, you usually solve this problem with a context provider or some kind of state management library. But in server components, this works a bit differently. We do the following. We change this function into a const. So export const getServerSession, and this is now an error function. This is just a different syntax to create a function. But now what we do is we wrap this whole function, so this part from the async to the closing curly brace, into parentheses, and we wrap this into another function, this cache function, which is an import from React. So this is a React feature, and this deduplicates this function within the same request. So when we open this page and call getServerSession twice, or even more, maybe we have more server components where we call it, as long as it's one single request, so one page, this will use the same value and only call this function one time. And we can see this in the logs after saving this. Now when I refresh the page, it only calls getServerSession once, no matter how often we actually call this function. This is how you deduplicate requests in server components. So this is important to know. I will leave this log in here just as a reminder. Of course, you can delete the console.log if you want, but these are these important details about Next.js and React that you need to understand. By the way, I'm currently working on a Next.js 16 course where I explain a lot of these important details about Next.js. So if you want to become a Next.js pro and really understand everything, then the best way to stay up to date is to join my newsletter under codingandflow.com/newsletter, because there I will send updates about this course. And I also send a lot of web development and React tips there. So it's a good idea to be in this newsletter anyway. So again, codingandflow.com/newsletter. I would be very happy if you join our group, and of course you can unsubscribe at any time. Okay, let's continue. Next, we want to focus on roles a little bit. So in our user dropdown menu, we already check if the user is an admin and only in this case show the admin item. I am currently an admin because we set this role earlier in the database. But right now this page doesn't have any protection yet. Let me set the role back to an empty string or something else. And when I refresh the page, I'm still able to view the admin page because we didn't check authentication there yet. So let's go to the admin page.tsx file. Here we want to get the session data again, which we do as usual, const session, await getServerSession. We make this an async function. We get the user from the session. Then, just like on the dashboard page, we check if the user is not defined and call unauthorized to redirect to the unauthorized page. Again, you can also redirect the user to the sign-in page, but I want to show the unauthorized page instead. But here we do an additional check, because if the user is authenticated but they don't have the admin role, then they should also not be able to view this page, right? So below we check if user.role is not equal to admin, we call forbidden, which, as I mentioned earlier, opens this forbidden.tsx file. So again, unauthorized and forbidden are both Next.js features. They render these specific pages. So let's save this and try this out. Since we are not in admin anymore, we now see this forbidden page, which means that we are authenticated, so we can see our user data, but we don't have the correct role. And when I set this back to admin and save this and refresh the page, I can view the admin page again. And if you want to authorize users in server actions, this works the same way. So for this admin page, I have this fake server action that is called delete application. Now this doesn't actually do anything besides awaiting 800 milliseconds. But here we want to pretend that we want to delete the application and we need admin access to call this. And we always have to protect our server actions because they are public server endpoints. They can be called by anyone. So we have to protect them. We do it the same as we did in the server component. We fetch the session via the same get server session function. So you can use this in server components, server actions, and API route handlers. It works everywhere. Again, we need the user from the session. Again, if the user is not authenticated, we can call unauthorized. So again, this also works in server actions. The difference is that here, it will not trigger the unauthorized page. Instead, it will return this 401 status code so that we can't call the server action. And if we call forbidden, it will return a 403 status code from the server action. So below we check if user.role is not equal to admin, the same as we did on the admin page. Then we want to return this 403 error. Now instead of calling these functions, we could also handle the error ourselves. We could throw an error, not authorized, for example, but it's more convenient to just call these functions. This is what they are there for. So let's try this out. Now just for a moment, I will change this to a different name, for example, admin2, just so that we need a different role here and on our page. I will change this back later. This is just for testing purposes. So now I am on the admin page, but I'm not in admin2, right? So I should not be able to call the server action. So when I click delete application, it should show an error message. Something went wrong. We don't need a more specific error message because a user should never be able to view this page in the first place. So a generic error is enough. But if we have the right permission, so let's change this back to just admin, then we are able to call the server action. So now we see application deletion authorized successfully because we have the appropriate role. Now, of course, this is where we simplified role-based access control. We just check for the string and decide if the user is authorized or not. Better-Auth also provides plugins for more sophisticated access control. For example, this organizations plugin, with which you can add different features related to roles and organizations. And they also have this admin plugin that contains different admin features, like setting user roles, changing the password of another user, like all these features that admins should have. They can work out of the box, but you have to install this admin plugin. I will not cover this here because this is a beginner tutorial, but if you want a more advanced Better-Auth tutorial, then let me know in the comments below what exactly you want to see. Do you want to see admin features, organization features, one of this other stuff here? Write a comment below. Next, we want to handle email verification, because right now the email verified value of my user is false. Now, of course, we could just change this to true in the database and they would technically be verified. But in a real app, you want to send the user an email with a link that they can click, which then automatically verifies their email address. Now, in order to send these emails, you will need your own domain, because this is where these emails are coming from. You have to buy such a domain. Most of them are very cheap. I like to buy them on namecheap.com, but there are also other domain providers. I will put an affiliate link to namecheap.com in the video description. If you buy your domain there, I will get a small commission. But if you don't have a domain and you don't want to set up one, you can also skip this part in the tutorial and you can still follow along with the rest. You just can't send emails, but this is fine. The rest of the tutorial will still work. But if you want to set up your own domain, then you can buy one here on Namecheap, create an account, buy the domain. And for sending the emails from our Next.js code, we will use Resend, which is another library. This is responsible for actually making the request to our domain name provider to send this email from this domain. So here we have to create an account. This is also free to use for up to one domain. Go ahead and create an account. In the Resend dashboard, you first have to configure your domain. Here under this domains tab, I've already done this for my domain, codinginflow-sample.com. So you click on add domain, one domain is free, and then you have to set some DNS records at your domain name provider. This is what authorizes Resend to send emails on your behalf by adding these values to your domain. For this, you can go into your Namecheap dashboard. Here in the dashboard, you select your domain, codinginflow-sample.com in my case, click on Manage. And here we want to go to the Advanced DNS settings. because there we can add these DNS values. And we have to add these ones. For example, we have to add a txt record with this host name and this value. So we copy the value, go to our DNS settings, add new record, select txt. The host is this one here, send, and the value is this one. Then save this, but I've already added this, so I click on cancel. And to set this MX record, you have to scroll down here, where you can set an MX record. You have to add these 4 records, or however many it shows you. And then you click on verify or restart, which then verifies the status. And as soon as this is green, we can start sending emails from this domain. If you are lost, you can also find these instructions here in the Resend documentation, for example for Namecheap or one of these other providers. After this is done, we need an API key for Resend. So we click on API keys, create API key. I'm gonna call this Better-Auth tut. For the permissions, sending access is enough because we only want to send emails from this API key. And then we select our domain, click on add, and then we copy this API key into our .env file in our project. We call the environment variable resend underscore API underscore key, and we pass this value. Of course, I will delete this one later, so you can't use it. Save this, and if you use your own project, you also have to install the Resend package with this name, but it's already installed in the starting code. Then we set up a function to send emails. We put it into our lib folder. Let's call it email.ts. In here we export an async function called send email, and we will use this to send all kinds of emails. This will take a few different input values. Let's wrap them into an interface for better type safety. Let's call it send email values. This will contain the to field where we want to send this email to, which is of course a string, a subject line, and the text of the email. This is enough. We pass these values down here, send email values, and we destructure them here, to, subject, and text. And then we use the Resend package to send this email via the domain that we configured. For this we first need a Resend object. Let's put it up here. Const Resend equals new Resend with an uppercase R, but looks like I have to import this manually from the Resend package. And in here we find this Resend constructor that we call. And to this we simply have to pass our API key, which we get from the environment variables. Resend underscore API underscore key. Make sure to spell this the same way as you have it in your .env file. And then down here we can use this resend object to send an email. Await resend.emails.send, parentheses, curly braces, and then we have to set a bunch of different values. Where is this email coming from? It has to come from the domain that you set up in Resend. If you try to use a different domain, this will not work. But the first part of the email doesn't matter. We can name this whatever we want. For example, verification at, but the domain name has to be what you put in Resend. Coding and flow -sample.com in my case. This is my domain that I bought. The first part of the email can be whatever you want. You can also call this, for example, no reply or emails or whatever. Just keep in mind that if you don't have an email inbox set up for this particular email, then you will not be able to receive any reply emails. But this is fine because we don't want to allow users to reply to this email, right? It's just for verification. So we don't need to be able to view these emails in some kind of inbox. We just need this domain to send emails. And then we pass to, subject, and the text, which are the values that we later pass to the send email function. So later we can send all kinds of different emails to different addresses with different content, but they will all be coming from this one verification email address, right? If you want to send emails from a different address, then you can add the from field as another input value here. But we send all emails from the same email address. To trigger verification emails, we have to add something to our auth.ts file, where we do all the Better-Auth configuration. Here we add another block. We can put it wherever we want. I want to put it between email and password and this user configuration. And here we can pass email verification. Curly braces, let's put a comma here. And here we can configure verification emails. First of all, we set send on sign up to true. So after we created an account, this will automatically send a verification email. Then we set auto sign in after verification to true as well. So when the user clicks the verification link in the email, they are automatically logged into their account. This is the most convenient. But then the core part is this send verification email function that you can implement. This function is what's actually responsible for sending the verification email. First of all, we make this an async function. We only need this data value here. We can remove the request. And actually, we want to destructure this data object. So we delete this data word, and instead we pass curly braces. And in here we find the user, a token, and a URL. We only care about the user and the URL, because the URL is the link that the user has to click to verify their email. If you don't want to use this URL, you can use the token instead, but we will use the standard URL because this is the easiest. In here we call our send email function that we just sent up, and we await it. So await send email, parentheses curly braces, and here remember we have to pass to, the subject line, and the text. To is the email address of the user for which we want to send the email. So this is this one here. To user.email. The subject is up to us. We set this to a string. For example, verify your email. This is the subject line of the email. And the text will be a backtick string so that we can put the URL in here. And this will say, click the link to verify your email. This text is up to you. But it's important that you put the URL in here, because the user has to click this URL to verify the email address. And remember, we set this redirect callback URL in our sign up function. And this is where the user will be redirected to after they verified their email. So this is all connected. So when we save this, this should now work. But we already have a user account, so this will not trigger anymore unless we create a new account. But sometimes users accidentally delete the verification email, or it goes into the spam folder. So we also want to have a functionality here to resend a verification email. And I already added a page for this. When the user clicks the verify email link in this banner here, they get redirected to a verify email where they can resend the verification email. But we have to implement this. For this, let's open this page. Verify email /page.tsx. Here I have a to-do to redirect the user either if they are not authenticated or if the email is already verified. So as usual, we fetch the session here. Await get server session. We make this an async function. We get the user data out of the session. Then we check if the user is not authenticated. We want to show the unauthorized page. But if the user is authenticated, but the email is already verified, then we want to redirect them to the dashboard, because then they don't need to click this verify email button, right? They are already verified. So let's redirect them to the dashboard. And then we have this resend verification button to which we pass the user's email address. Right now this is this placeholder. Let's pass the actual email address, which is of course user.email. And in the resend verification button, which I also already prepared, we have this function where we want to send the actual verification email. And as usual, I have a loading, a success, and an error state in here, and the UI already prepared. But the important part is this function that we will implement together. This looks very similar to the sign up and sign in pages that we already handled earlier. We set our states back to null, so set success null, set error null to hide these messages from the UI. and reset is loading to true to show a loading indicator. Then we call a Better-Auth function which can return an error, await auth client, dot send verification email, parentheses curly braces, and in here we have to pass the email address where we want to send this email to, which is the prop that we pass to this button. That's the user email. And again a callback URL like on the sign up page where we want to redirect the user to after they clicked the verification link, which again is /email verified. That's the page I already set up. After we called this, we set the loading state back to false. And then we handle the error and success states as usual below. If there is an error, we put the error message into the UI or our fallback message. And if the request was successful, we set a success message to verification email sent successfully. We save this. And then we can try this out. So back in our app, we should now be able to use this Resend verification email button. Let's click it. It loads. It shows the success message, verification email sent successfully. And now if you configured everything correctly, you should find an actual verification email in your email inbox, which looks like this. A simple title, it's coming from our verification email address, and it contains this text and this verification link, which has the token in the URL and a callback URL with the redirect. Now, of course, you can make this email more sophisticated and design it better. I kept it basic to keep the tutorial simple. If you want to set up more advanced email layouts, then you can check out React Email, which is closely related to Resend, and they have this package to create email layouts with React components, which is really cool. You can check this out if you want. It's called React Email, but here we keep it simple. And now when we click this link, we get redirected to the email verified page. This means the email verification was successful. This is all handled automatically by Better-Auth via this token, and then it redirects us to the callback URL. So now when we go back to the dashboard, this banner is gone. And when we refresh Prisma Studio, we should see that email verified is now true. So the email verification was successful. And if you want, you can make certain features of your app only available to users with a verified email by just checking in your code for user.emailVerified. This is a boolean, either true or false, and then you can decide what you allow the user and what features you block. Alternatively, you can also require the user to have a verified email before they can even sign into your app. If you prefer this, you can configure this in the auth.ts file. Here you can set require email verification in the email and password key to true. This will only allow the user to log in their account with a verified email. Otherwise, they can't even sign in. But I prefer to let the user sign in and then check if email verified is true or false within the app. But I will leave it in as a comment, as a reminder, only if you want to block login completely. And when we try to open the verify email page directly with an account whose email address is already verified, we get redirected to the dashboard. Now in our login page, we also have this forgot password button. When we click this, we get to the forgot password page where we can enter our email address and get a password resend link. And this works very similar to verification email links. So let's implement this as well. Back in our auth.ts file, we can configure this email in the email and password key. Here we can pass this send reset password function, where again we get the data and the request, and we destructure the data the same way as we did down here. We want the user and the URL, and we want to make this an async function. And then we simply have to send an email similar to what we did down here. So we call await send email, parentheses curly braces. Again, we want to send this to the user's email address. Just the subject and the text are different. The subject will say reset your password. Of course, what you pass here is up to you. And the text will contain the URL that the user has to click. Click the link to reset your password, and then we put the actual URL in here that contains the token. We trigger this password email from the forgot password form component, which is what you saw on the screen here. This is the forgot password form. Again, I've already set up the form and the UI, and we only have to implement this onSubmit function. As usual, we handle the states first. We set success to null and the error. Then again, we call a Better-Auth function that can return an error from the auth client. This one is called request password reset. To this we have to pass the email that we entered, which is this one here. That's coming from this input field. So the user enters the email address, and if this email address exists, it sends a reset password email to this address, comma. And then we have to pass redirect to. Now resetting a password is a two-step process. First, they enter the email here, they get sent a verification link, they click this link, and then they have to enter a new password, right? And this happens on a separate page, which is called reset password, which I've also set up. Now this only works if there's a token in the URL, which is automatically taken care of by Better-Auth. It sends this email with the token, but just for a moment I add a fake token here so that you can see the UI. So here we have a field to set a new password. Now I just noticed that I didn't put a confirm password field here. You can add this as well if you want, but at the end we only need this one password that the user enters to reset it. Okay, so here to the redirect to value, we pass this page where the user can reset their password. So /reset -password. Okay. As usual, we check if we get an error back, in which case we want to set the error state so that the user can see the error message in the UI. And if the request was successful, we want to set a success message. If an account exists for this email, we've sent a password reset link. Because Better-Auth will not return an error if this email address doesn't exist. And this is on purpose because this avoids that malicious actors can phish email addresses by just entering a bunch of them and testing which one exists. Instead, we will always get a success message, even if we don't have a user for this email address, because this is more secure. So this is what we show here as the success message. And then afterwards, in the success case, I also want to make the form empty again, which we can do with form.reset, and that's it. So this will trigger the reset password email, but the actual password reset happens on this reset password page, which is this reset password form component where the user can enter a new password, which then calls this onSubmit function. And here we want to actually set the new password. So again, we set success and error states back to null. Then we call another resend function, await auth client, reset password. And to this we have to pass the new password, which is coming from the input field, and the token. Where is the token coming from? As I already mentioned, the token will be a search param in the URL, and this URL is generated by Better-Auth. This token is then necessary to reset the password, and this is there for security. So we have to get this token out of the URL and put it here into this function. You can read the search params in Next.js server components like this. I explained this in my Next.js beginner tutorial. So here we want to read this token value out of the search params, and then we pass it to the reset password UI. If this token is missing, then you see this error message instead that you already saw earlier, because then we can't reset our password. We need this token, and then we pass it to the reset password form, where we then use it to call this reset password function. So again, this token is coming from the URL search params. As usual, we check if we get an error back, in which case we want to set the error state. And in the success case, we want to set a success message. Password has been reset. You can now sign in. And then I want to automatically redirect the user to the sign-in page, but after a short delay. We can do this with this JavaScript setTimeout function, to which we pass an error function. Here we want to call router.push to redirect the user automatically to /signin. And the second value to setTimeout is the delay in milliseconds. Let's say 3 seconds. So after 3 seconds, we automatically redirect the user to the sign-in page. But of course, this is up to you. You can also implement this differently. And I want to reset the input field. And by the way, this reset password form uses this password validation schema, which I already set up in the starting code. This checks that we enter a password with at least 8 characters, and it has to contain at least one special character. We use the same validation schema in the sign-up form, up here. So both these forms have the same rule. Now by default, this schema is not applied in Better-Auth itself. So it only works on the front end, but not on the back end. So technically the user can send any password to Better-Auth if they circumvent our front end, and this password schema is not enforced currently. But we will later enforce it on the back end as well. So the user can never enter a password that doesn't follow these rules. But we will take care of this later. For now, let's try out our reset password functionality. So this is not a real token, which means that this should not work. Let's try it out, reset password, and we get an error back, invalid token, that we show in the UI. Instead, we have to go to the forgot password page, which we can, for example, reach from the sign-in page. Forgot your password, and here we can enter our email address. Now when I enter an email address that is not actually signed up, as I explained earlier, we still see the success message because we don't want to tell this person if this email exists or not. This would be insecure. But since this user doesn't exist, they don't actually get this email. But when I enter my real email address, we will get an email with a reset password link. There we go, this is the reset password email with this link, and when we click it, we get redirected to reset password, and here is the token that I was talking about, but this is an actual working token. This token automatically expires after an hour or so, you can configure this, but with this token in the URL, I should be able to actually reset my password. So I enter a new password, click reset password. This updates the password in your database, and then we get the success message, and 3 seconds later we get redirected to the login page where I can now log back into my account with this new password. Perfect. As I mentioned earlier, this password validation rule that we have on the front end, which requires us to add at least one special character, at the moment is only enforced on the front end, but not in our backend in Better-Auth. So technically, a user could circumvent this rule and still create a password without a special character. By default, Better-Auth only enforces at least 8 characters. This is the only rule in Better-Auth for passwords. We can customize this in our auth.ts file. Here in email and password, we can set a min password length. But as the name implies, this only defines a password length and not other rules like special characters. So we don't want to use this here. We don't want to change the min length. Instead, I want to use the same validation schema that we also use on the front end, this password schema. So how can we do this in Better-Auth? The answer is we can use hooks for that. Hooks are ways to hook into the lifecycle in Better-Auth and execute your own logic, for example, when the sign up endpoint is called or any of the other endpoints. Let's implement one of these hooks to enforce our password rule. We put it somewhere here into this auth object. I'm going to put it at the end, but this is just personal preference. Here we have this hooks block, curly braces. Here we can add before and after hooks. Before hooks are executed before the endpoint runs. And this is where we want to check the password rule, right? So we pass before colon. Then we have to pass create of middleware, but we have to import this manually. Import curly braces from Better-Auth/API. And here we need two values. We need this create of middleware function and this API error type. Scroll back down. Here we call this function create of middleware. And this receives another error function that gets passed this context value. So we create an error function, async context, and curly braces. This before function will be called before we execute any Better-Auth endpoint. So this includes all of them. So here we have to check what endpoint we are actually calling. And we can get this information from this context object. So we check if context.path equals, and here we pass the path that we want to run this function for. We want to run this when we try to create a new account, which is this /signup/email endpoint. But we also want to run this function when we try to reset our password, right? Which is this other path, context.path/reset password. Now, how do you figure out what you have to pass here? You can see this in the network tab. Let me go to the reset password page once again. When I enter something here and click on reset password, I can see the endpoint that is called here in this network tab. There we go. It's just API/auth/reset password. So this last part is what we care about. This is the path we enter here because this is the path we want to intercept. And one more, context.path is equal to /change password. We haven't implemented this one yet, but we will later use this path when we allow a user to change their password from their profile page. So for all these three paths, we want to enforce our password strength requirement, right? So in here we can get the password that the user typed in again from this context object. In this context object is the body, and in here is a password. So when the user signs up for a new account, there will be a password object in the request body. Similarly, when a user resets the password or changes their password, there will also be a password in the request body, but there it has a different name. There it's called new password in camel case. You can actually see this in the request too. In the payload is this new password. So you can always check this either in the documentation or in this network tab. So this is the value that we send when we make a request to these endpoints. And in there is the password. And then we want to run this password through our password schema here. So we destructure a const. We can take this password schema that we set up. This is a zot schema. On here we can call save parse. If you want to know more about this, you can take a look into the zot documentation. Zot is spelled like this, and this is the validation library we use. And there we have the save parse function to which we can pass the password input. And either it passes these rules or it doesn't. If it doesn't pass these rules, we get an error object back. So if this error is defined, we know that the password we send here doesn't adhere to our password schema. And then we don't want to allow the user to continue. And we can do this by throwing an error. This is what we imported this API error type earlier up here from the Better-Auth API package. We want to return such an API error because this API error is then shown in the UI. So for example, here in our reset password form, remember we render error.message, and this is coming from this API error. So we throw an API error, parentheses. The first argument is the type of error. We have a bunch of different values that we can pass here. We pass bat request, comma curly braces, and then we can define the error message ourselves. invalid password. Or maybe let's even make this more explicit. Password not strong enough, so that we actually see that this works. Let's save this. Let's give this a try on the sign up page. So just for a moment in the sign up form, I want to disable the password schema so that we don't have it active on the front end, only on the back end. So for a moment I set this just to a z.string, so we can enter any string on the front end. Let's try this out. Florian at test.com. We are not going to create a new account anyway. So now I don't have these password strength rules on the front end, which means that I can enter a password like this. But we should get an error message back because Better-Auth now also prevents this password from going through. Actually, let me enter more than 8 characters, because by default Better-Auth checks for 8 characters, but not for a special character, right? When we click create account, we get this error message, password not strong enough. This is what we entered here in our auth.ts file as the error message. So now we have this password strength rule applied on the backend as well. And let's not forget to reset the validation rule on the sign up form so that we enforce the password schema here as well, so that we can't even enter it here on the front end. Instead we see these form error messages, because this way we avoid making an unnecessary request. Instead the user gets the error message immediately, but it's always important to also enforce your validation rules on the back end, because otherwise your back end is not really secure, because the front end can always be circumvented if the user knows how. Next we will implement social login with Google and GitHub. And when you look into the Better-Auth documentation, you can see that there are many more options available, but Google and GitHub are popular ones. Let's start with Google. So we have to go to console.cloud.google.com to set up an OAuth app. And this is completely free. So here in the sidebar, we click on API and services, credentials. Maybe this UI changes in the future, but there should be a feature called credentials. So first we have to set up a project if you haven't yet. I'm gonna call it Better-Auth tutorial. Create. Then we want to create credentials. We need an OAuth client ID. Okay, this wants us to configure the consent screen first. So we do this, get started. Again, we have to give the app a name, Better-Auth tutorial. For the user support email, we select the email address of this account. I think this is the only option you can usually select here. For a real app, you want to select external, so other users can sign up. Again, we have to enter an email address here. Again, I'm going to use this recording email address. Next. And I agree to the user data policy. Continue and create. Wasn't too difficult, was it? Then again, we want to create an OAuth client. So let's click here. Application type is a web application. Again, we have to give it a name. This can be the name of your actual app. And then we have to set the authorized redirect UIs. This one here is not important for us, but this one. Because the way OAuth works is that the user gets redirected to Google, where they log into their account, and then they get redirected to our app with a special token in the URL. But we have to set the URL where the user is allowed to get redirected to. And you have to enter this exact URL, localhost 3000. For development, of course, in production later, you also have to add your production URL. You can actually add multiple ones. And then this exact path, /API/auth/callback/Google. And this path, this callback, will be handled by Better-Auth automatically. Better-Auth will then extract the necessary token from the URL and authenticate the user. So enter this URL here and then we click on create. And then we get a client ID and a client secret. We copy both of them into our project, of course into the .env file. We add 2 new environment variables, Google_client_ID and Google client secret, which is the second value that we got. This one here. Of course, you have to keep these values secret. That's why it's called secret. Okay, let's save this, and this should be it for the Google setup. Next, we set up GitHub. For this, you need a GitHub account. Log into your GitHub account, go to the settings here in the sidebar, and then we scroll down to developer settings. And here we want to create an OAuth app. New OAuth app. This flow is a bit simpler. Again, I call it Better-Auth tutorial. Here in production, you put your production URL, but we are in development, so I'm going to put localhost 3000 here. I think this should still work. And the callback URL is the same one we used for Google, but of course with GitHub at the end. And later in production, you have to create another OAuth app with your production URL, because here we can only enter one. And then we register this application. And again, we get a client ID and a client secret, which we put into our .env file. GitHub client ID. And we generate a new secret. There we go, we copy this. GitHub client secret, and we save this. You can also upload a logo for your app or change the settings, but we don't care about any of this right now. After saving the .env file, we open auth.ts, where we have to activate OAuth. So somewhere here, of course the order doesn't matter, we add the social providers block, curly braces, then we enter Google curly braces, and here we simply have to pass the client ID, which we get from the environment variables, Google _client _ID, and since this can be undefined, we add a non-null assertion operator at the end. Then the client secret, which is process.env.google client secret. And then we do the same for GitHub. Maybe let's duplicate this block. Just change this to GitHub. And this here as well. Like a pro. There we go. And now social login for Google and GitHub should be activated. We just have to trigger it when we click our buttons. And we do this, of course, in the sign-in form component, where we already have the handle social sign-in function here with this to-do comment. This will be called with one of these two strings, and I simply call this function down here when we click any of these social sign-in buttons. Nothing special. This one calls handle social sign-in with the value Google, and this one with GitHub. And then we want to handle the social sign-in here. Again, we start by resetting the error and setting the loading state to true. And then below we call one of the auth client functions that can return an error. Auth client.signin, and earlier we called email, and now since we activated social sign-in the auth.ts file, we can also call signin.social. So what we can call on this object is inferred from whatever we configure here, which gives us really nice type safety. Parentheses curly braces, we pass the provider, which is Google or GitHub, and then a callback URL where the user will be redirected to after the sign-in was successful. We will redirect them to the dashboard page. Then we simply set the loading state back to false and handle the potential error if we get one back, by setting the error again to the same value we used up here, the error message or our fallback message. We don't need to handle the success case because this function will redirect us to either GitHub or google.com, so the user doesn't need a toast message. And that's it. Let's save it and give it a try. So we open our app, log out of your account if you're still logged in, sign in with Google. We get redirected to accounts.google.com, where I can select one of my Google accounts. I confirm this, and then I get redirected to our dashboard. Yeah, this error here is important. Better-Auth automatically takes the image of my Google account, the user image, and puts it into our database. But these Next.js images that we use to show the user avatar don't allow loading any URL. We have to whitelist them explicitly in our configuration. So what we need is this URL here, the start of this URL, We go into our project, open the next config file, and here we have to insert, I think it's called images, yeah, colon curly braces. Here we enter remote patterns, colon. This should be an array of objects. And here we have to define the URLs that we allow to load images from. Here we set the protocol to HTTPS without the colon, and the host name to the URL we just copied, but without the HTTPS colon / only this part. And this should be it. You might have to restart your Next.js app, but I think this should also happen automatically after changing this file. Let's see if it now works. Let's refresh the page. And there we go, we see our dashboard with the avatar of my Google account, which is really cool. Let's also take a look into Prisma Studio, where we now have a second user. That's this one. They have an image, they don't have a role yet. The email is automatically verified because the email was already verified on Google, so we don't have to verify it again. We also have a new account, but instead of credential, the provider ID is now Google, and this account is connected to the user. So all the important information is in your database. And let's give the GitHub sign in a try too, to make sure that this works as well. Sign in with GitHub. I select my Coding and Flow GitHub account. We get redirected to the dashboard. Again, we have to whitelist this image. You already know how to do this. So I'm gonna skip this part and just put this into the next config file. And there we go, dashboard. Again, we see the Coding and Flow logo, but this account is coming from GitHub. Nice. But we are not done yet. Next, I want to improve the user experience a bit, because even when we are logged in, we can still reach the sign-in page and the sign-up page, but it would be better if the user gets redirected back to the dashboard automatically because they are already authenticated, right? So we go into our project, and I already explained earlier that we use route groups in our project. So our pages are organized into the main section and the auth section. The auth section includes the sign-in and sign-up page and the forgot and reset password pages. And here's also this layout.tsx file. This layout wraps all our auth pages. Right now this layout doesn't have any purpose because we just return the children, which are the pages. But in here we can check authentication and redirect the user if they are already logged in, because layouts in Next.js are also server components by default. So as usual, we fetch the session here with await get server session. Again, this is deduplicated, so we can call this in the layout and the page and the navbar. No matter how often we call it, it will only actually be called once. So we have to make this an async function. We get the session. Out of the session, we want to get the user, as usual, via session.user. And then below we check if the user is defined. So if they are already logged in, we just redirect them with this redirect function from next/navigation to /dashboard. And if they are not logged in, we just return the children, which are the actual auth pages. So when we save this and open our app again, we are already redirected. Let's try to open the sign-in page again, and we get immediately redirected to the dashboard. The same happens for sign up, and also for forgot password and reset password. We always get redirected to the correct place. Nice. Now you might have heard that layouts in Next.js are not secure to do authentication because the page can still leak. And this is correct, but we don't do authentication here for security. We only do it for convenience. We fetch the session again in each page and each server actions where we actually need it. We just fetch it here in the layout to redirect the user and nothing else. So this is completely fine if it's just for convenience. Now we could also handle the redirect in the Next.js middleware. This is described in the Better-Auth documentation. They have a section about middleware, but I actually find this more complicated and I prefer doing it in a layout file. Much simpler in my opinion. So I skip the middleware, but if you want to learn more about this, check out the Better-Auth documentation. When we try to reach the dashboard while we are logged out, we get redirected to the unauthorized page, right? Here we can click the sign in button. When the user gets redirected to the unauthorized page, I want to remember the URL where the user originally wanted to go to. For example, they try to open the dashboard, or let's say the admin page, and they see this page. When I click on sign in, I want to remember the /admin so that we can redirect the user to the admin page after sign in was successful, because this is a better user experience instead of always redirecting them back to the dashboard. And we can actually do this. For this, let's open our unauthorized.tsx file. And here we don't receive the URL that the user tried to open, at least not as props, but we can retrieve them client-side. So what we do is, we turn this into a client component, because now we can call React hooks in here. And one of these hooks that Next.js provides is called usePathname. This is the path name the user is currently on. And as you can see, even when we are on the unauthorized page, the path name is still the original URL. So in this case, /admin or /dashboard. So we can read this from the URL via this usePathname hook. And then we can put it into the URL as a search param to remember it. So down here we redirect to /signin, right? Let's turn this into a backtick string. Again /signin, question mark to put a search param in here. We can call this whatever we want. I call this redirect equals. Then in here we want to put the path name that we read from the URL. So this is now added to this sign in link. Let's try this out. When I now click sign in, you can see that we have this redirect param in the URL. And now after sign in was successful, we can redirect back to this page, which of course we do in the sign in form component. Somewhere up here I already called the useSearchParams hook, which gives us the search params from the URL. Let's create a const redirect and assign it to searchparams.get with the same name that we used over here, redirect. Make sure these two names match. We read this value, this string from the URL, and then when we call router.push after sign in the onSubmit function, instead of the dashboard, we can redirect the user to this redirect string, but this can be undefined, so as the fallback value we still use /dashboard. So if there is no redirect param in the URL, we will redirect back to the dashboard. And we can do the same down here for the callback URL for social sign-ins. So we also redirect back to the original page. And this creates a much better user experience. Let's try this out. So we have /admin here in the URL. And when I now sign into my account, I should get redirected to this page. There we go. Again, the full code for this project is in the video description if you want to check it out again. Next, we want to allow a user to update their profile data. I already prepared the profile page, but none of these buttons here is doing anything right now. So let's go into our project and open the profile page.tsx file. We are not even fetching the session here yet. So let's change this. As usual, we fetch the session from get server session. We make this an async function. And we get the user out of the session. Then we can check if the user is not authenticated, in which case we call unauthorized again. Then somewhere down here we render the profile details form. This is this first form here, and we need to pass the correct user data to this form, because right now this is filled with the wrong name. So we go into this component, we set up props, profile details form props, and we want to pass the user here. Again, we use the one that we set up in our auth.ts file. We destructure these props here, profile details form props, and then in our page.tsx file, we forward the user data that we fetched from the server. And then here in this form, we delete this fake user and render the real user data instead. So let's take a look at our page again. When we refresh it, this should show Florian Walter, my real name. Perfect. I also want to allow the user to update their name and upload a new image, which we also do in the profile details form component. Here in this onSubmit function, we get the name and the image from the form input. Now the image here is a base 64 string. I wanted to keep this tutorial simple, so when the user selects an image here, this is not uploaded to a file storage, what you would do in a real app. Instead, I turn this into a base 64 string via this function here. Base 64 is basically a string representation of an image. You can turn an image into a string, and this allows us to save this image in our database. This way we don't need a separate file storage. It's not great because these strings are very big, but for a tutorial like this one, it's enough. If you want to learn how to upload images to an actual file storage, I do this in my updated Next.js course that will come out in a few weeks. If you want to stay up to date about the course and get my web development tips, go to codinginflow.com/newsletter and sign up for my free newsletter. Okay, here in the onSubmit function, we receive these two values and we want to update the user data with them. As usual, we start by resetting the status to null and the error message as well. This is just the success and the error message. Then again, we call one of our auth client functions, await auth client.update user, to which we simply pass this name and the image. And that's pretty much it. Of course, we also handle potential errors. If error is defined, we want to set the error state to error.message or a fallback message, failed to update profile. You can enter whatever you want. But if this was successful, I want to set the status message to profile updated. This will also be shown in the UI. And then I also want to call router.refresh. So up here I call the Next.js use router hook, and down here we refresh the page. We do this so that this name here in the navbar also updates, because this is fetched server side, and in order to refresh this, we have to refresh the page. So let's save this and give this a try. So I'm gonna change the name to just Florian. When we save this, we should see a success message, and the name up here in the navbar should also change. Profile updated, and it changes here too. Isn't this cool? Let me also upload an image. So I'm gonna pick this one. Again, let me change the name to maybe Flo Walter. Save changes. Profile updated, and we see both the image and the new name here in the navbar. So this works. And this data should also be displayed on the dashboard. There we go. Next, let's handle this form here where a user can change their email. So back in our project, this is called email form. Right now we pass a placeholder email. As the default input value, of course, we want to pass user.email here. So when we save this, this field should already contain our real email address. There we go. Now let's implement this email form. Again, we have this to do in the onSubmit function. Again, we set the status and the error messages back to null. And again, we call an auth client function. This one is called change email. This expects the new email, which we get from these values. Actually, let's destructure this like on the other pages, and in here is the new email. That's coming from the input field. And again, we can pass a callback URL, because when we change the email, the user actually has to confirm the email address again. And the callback URL is where the user gets redirected to after they verified this new email. We use the same one as we used earlier, /email verified. Then we handle potential errors as usual. We set the error text to error.message or a fallback string, failed to initiate email change, for example. And if this was successful, we set a status message to verification email sent to your current address. because this is where we send the verification email for the new email address to. But changing the email address will only work after we enabled it in the auth.ts file. And we do this in the user block that we already have here. We have additional fields, and here we can also set change email. We have to enable this explicitly, otherwise we get an error message. And then again we have to implement a function that sends this new email. Send change email verification. We make this an async function and destructure the data as usual. We need the user, the new email, and the verification URL. And then we already know how this works. We call our send email function, to which we pass this data. We want to send this to the user's old email address. You can also send it to the new email address, I guess, but in the Better-Auth documentation, they recommended to send it to the old email. I'm not sure if you should send it to the new or the old one, but you can change this if you want. The subject line will be approve email change, and the text will be a backtick string. Your email has been changed to. Here I want to render the new email address. Click the link to approve the change column. And here we want to put the confirmation URL, which the user then has to click, and then they get redirected to the email verified page. Just like in the original verification process that we set up earlier. So let's save this as well and give this a try. So let me enter a different email. codingandflow.recording@gmail.com. Request change. Couldn't update your email. Let's take a look into the console. Yeah, the email address already exists. This is why this doesn't work. So I'm gonna delete this user from my database. Here in the user table, I want to use this email address, so I'm going to delete this user, and this automatically deletes all the related entries in these other tables. So let me delete this one, and now we should be able to use this email address. Request change. We see the success message, and this is the new verification email. It's not the most beautiful layout, but you can customize this. So approve email change. Your email has been changed to Coding and Flow Recording. Click the link to approve the change. We click it, then it changes the email, and then we get redirected to email verified. And now we should see this new email address. Yeah, the layout is a bit broken. I have to truncate this, but this works. Now we have this new email address connected to this account. Let's try signing in with this one. So sign out. Let's first try the old one to see if this still works. This shouldn't work. Yeah, invalid email or password, but the new one should work. There we go. Now a user can update the email address, but the email isn't verified yet. So we click the verify email button again. We resend the verification email. It's a nice way to double check that this stuff still works, right? Actually, it sent the first verification email automatically. We didn't even have to click this button. But now when we click it, we verify this new email address, and now the banner in the dashboard is gone. Perfect. Okay, one more form in our profile we have to take care of. That's the change password form. This is another auth client function, and we handle this in the password form component, this one here. We go to the onSubmit function, remove the to-do comment, and do the usual dance. We set a status, and the error states back to null, and then we call an auth client function. Await auth client change password this time, and we get the input here from the onSubmit function. This is the current password input and the new password input. So these two input fields here. We get these values here and we pass them to this function. Current password, new password, and then we can set this revoke other session boolean. If we set this to true, the user will be logged out of their other sessions wherever they are logged in. They could be logged in on their phone, computer, laptop, and so on. And by setting this to true, they will be logged out in all these places because they just changed their password. So this is a good idea for security. Below we handle the error. Failed to change password. And we want to show a success message. Password changed. And let's also reset the form input to make it empty again. And that's already it. Let's save this and try this out. So my old password was asd123/. And I want to change this to a different one. Now the same password strength rules here should be applied, because up here I use our password schema, and remember in the hooks we also added the change password route earlier. And this includes this one here, the change password function that we call. So this should not be allowed, not on the front end and also not on the back end. Let me change this to a percentage sign, change password, success message, let's sign out. Let's try signing in with the old password first. This should not work anymore. Yeah, but a new one should get us into our account. And there we go. We are back into our account. Let me change the password back, just so that I don't forget it. So now the current password is this one, and I want to set it back to my old one without any typos. There we go. And the last thing I want to implement is this logout everywhere button, which, as the name implies, logs out this user on all their devices. It destroys all their sessions, and this is also an important feature for security. We do this in this logout everywhere button component. Remove the to-do. We set the loading state to true. We call an auth client function. Revoke sessions, which doesn't take any arguments. We set the loading state back to false and handle potential error messages, and that's already it. If this throws an error, we show a toast message this time. Failed to log out everywhere. And if we don't get an error, we show a success toast, logged out from all devices. And then we want to redirect the user back to the sign-in page because now they are logged out, right? To try this out, I opened an incognito browser tab where I will also log into my account, because an incognito tab is like a different device. It's disconnected from the normal tab. So now we are logged into this account 2 times. When I click logout everywhere here, I get redirected to the sign-in page, and now when I refresh this page, I'm not logged in anymore. And if I was logged in on a mobile phone, for example, my session there would also be destroyed. Feature-wise, that's everything I'm gonna cover in this tutorial. If you want a more advanced Better-Auth tutorial, let me know in the comments below. But there's one more important thing we have to cover, and that's deployment. Because when you deploy your app, there are some additional steps you have to do. So, first we open the package.json file. When you use Prisma as your ORM, before you deploy your app, you have to add this post-install script and set this to Prisma generate. This makes sure that in production, the Prisma client is generated properly, otherwise we get an error. The easiest way to deploy a Next.js app is to Vercel. Here we can add a project directly from our GitHub account. So first we have to push this to GitHub. You can do this directly in VS Code here in the source control tab. You can push this and connect this to a GitHub account. So let me do this. The commit message will just say app finished. Not very professional, but it's sufficient for this tutorial. Commit and push. Then this might ask you if you want to create a new GitHub repository. This already has one connected, but you can go ahead and create a new one. Now in your Vercel account, you can click on Add New Project and add this directly from your GitHub account. Cool stuff, huh? So this is automatically inferred as a Next.js project, but we have to set the environment variables because we need the same keys that we used over here. We copy all of them at once and paste them in here. For the Better-Auth URL, we actually don't have to set anything because this is automatically provided by Vercel and the rest can stay the same. Of course, in production, you can use different values for your database and everything, but here we keep it simple. Then we click on deploy. Looks like this was successful. Let's open this and see if our app still works. So when I try to go to the dashboard, I see the unauthorized page and everything is a bit faster here because this is a production build. It's connected to the same database, so our user accounts should still work. Very cool. We can change the theme, of course. We can go to our different pages, profile. Let me change the name, see if this still works. Works. Can go to the admin page with admin access. And yeah, everything still works. Now for social login, you will have to update the callback URL in your Google account and in your GitHub account. Remember earlier we set this to localhost 3000. You have to set this to this URL here. This is now your production URL. But other than that, you won't have to change anything. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial on Better-Auth. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel for more tutorials like this. I also have a free React Best Practices video course that you should totally get. You can go to codingandflow.com/reactbestpractices. When you join it, you will also be put into my free email newsletter, where I send web development tips about once every 2 weeks. Of course, you can unsubscribe at any time. Again, that's codingandflow.com/reactbestpractices to get the course and join the newsletter. I'm also currently working on an updated Next.js course where you will learn everything about Next.js 16, everything you need to know, and we will also use Better-Auth there, but with a more advanced implementation where we use, for example, partial pre-rendering, which is a new Next.js feature. If you want to stay up to date, you can join my newsletter where I send updates about this course from time to time. To join the newsletter, you can go to codingandflow.com/newsletter and I will keep you up to date and send you my web dev tips. Then I wish you a nice rest of the day. Happy coding. Take care.